Well, I'm not seeing anything, but let's go over here. Come on, you can do it.
That's just work, right?
Well, yeah. Is that projector even on? Is it possibly the problem? Okay. We're done.
Does it take the turn the projector on?
I'm not, like I said, I don't have loose slides, so we'll have to figure that out.
You don't? I have them. But let me try. I know. We just broke it.
I know. And in the interim, I'll go see if I can find loose slides.
There we go. Hold on.
Okay. Okay, so
We're good. We got it through, right?
Yes.
The big one through.
I just want to listen to the update.
Yeah, it's meaning I don't think
your public awaits.
That's all right. That's all right. Okay, we should.
Yeah, we're late.
Okay, we should start.
Okay, everybody, let's get started. Big crowd today. Welcome to Manet. So let's start off with current working group status. Oh, we had first the note well. So remember the note well. You've seen this more than once. Okay, so we've got a reasonably short agenda today. Just a quick status on the working group, status update on the working group, followed by Lou Berger presenting on, I've got 3 drafts here, there are actually 4. And then the rest of the time is either open mic, or with the huge attendance we have today, we may give you 40 minutes of your lives back. It's probably easier to do the latter. But anyway, next slide if you would please, sir. So there's the document status. We've got a draft out on OLSR security threats. It's in Auth 48 status. It's waiting on one of the authors to respond to an editor update. The credit windowing draft is held. We're looking at merging that credit draft with one of the ones that Lou's going to be presenting in a moment here. The multipath draft is in AD evaluation, as is the 5444 usage draft. And the big news for us anyway, MANET cleared IESG last call. It has been approved for publication, or DLEP rather, has been approved for publication. So I'm ready to hit the bar tonight. Next slide, please.
Real quick, for anyone that might not know, it was just a small update to the draft that allowed it to get cleared, which referred to how security happens in different situations, and it was just some context given there. And did you add a reference?
We added a reference.
And added a reference to point to the correct draft to give.
Added an informative reference. I think Rick Taylor said it was 7 words that we added to the draft, if I remember correctly.
So for anyone doing DLEP, it cleared without any functional changes, which is always good for people who have implementations.
Rick Taylor, we made an informative reference to a document which describes some approaches to pre-shared key handling for TLS. So if you're in a dedicated deployment for DLEP and you want to use TLS, but you don't have a PKI infrastructure, there is now an informative reference for you, and that unblocked the process.
Okay, current status. Again, we've got DLEP extension drafts in flight, and we've also, in Seoul, there was a discussion about how to handle what we're calling container TLVs in DLEP, TLVs that hold other TLVs. There's been some discussion on that, both on list and off list. There's no documents behind it as of yet.
I think you'll find we refer to them as data items, Stan, not TLVs. It's Rick Taylor being pedantic.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Data items that contain other data items. But if you're interested in getting into this discussion, please get on the mailing list because we're actively discussing it right now. So let us know and let's get involved. With that, that's all I've got. So I think we're going to, barring any questions, we're going to turn it over to Luke.
Hello. I'm Lou Berger. I'm going to be giving an update on the 4 drafts that we recently accepted as working group drafts. In a moment, I may actually have to run back and get a glass of water. So at the last meeting, we talked about 4 different extensions. After the meeting, we polled the working group, and they were accepted as working group items. 3 of them are unchanged since they were accepted, and those are the ones that are the -00. Thank you very much.
Try.
The last one, the DA credit extension, we've done 1 revision. That revision, and I'll talk about it in more detail, it did 2 things. One, it talked about when to send data, and I think I have more of that on the next slide. And the other thing it did is it went through, it identified open issues in the document. Most of the open issues are actually from Stan, as well as the issue that Rick brought up at the last meeting on how to structure lists and some optional information inside a data item, and came up with an idea of a better way to do it. We hashed back and forth and came up with, it's really Rick's idea of the DLEP containers. I'll talk about that a little bit more also, but that's now identified in open issues in the -01 document. At the last meeting, we talked about the availability of a DLEP implementation from one of the co-authors. And that, in fact, has happened. You can go pull the code from GitHub. And not only is there a DLEP implementation, there's also Wireshark dissectors. The DLEP implementation there, someone asked me offline about, okay, what routing protocols does it support? Thinking it's on the router side. The answer is none. It's actually just a stack. It's intended to be able to be implemented with on either side. So it's protocol to be integrated into a larger implementation as opposed to the larger implementation. But it's reusable, and it's available out there. And of course, it does have some open source license terms to it. I can't speak to those. That's from my co-author. But it's coming out of Lincoln Labs from OIT. So now we're going to go on and look at the open issues and talk about what the next steps are. I'm actually going to go through each document. Next. So the first two documents, one's the latency range extension, so reports on the latency you would expect to reach a particular MAC destination. And the second one with the multi-hop forwarding, that's say how many hops are there, or if there are multiple hops, and whether you want to restrict the ability to do multiple hops to a destination. We don't think there's any open issues on there, but we're also think that it would be good to get some additional eyes on it, particularly those who are implementing. So we'd really like to hear about such implementations. And even if you're not doing implementation, we still ask that you read the documents and give us feedback. After that, last fall. They're not really that complex. So it won't take you very long to read it. If you want to read it and say, yeah, looks good, that's great. If you want to read it and say, this is really broken and here's how you do it, that's also great. So, but please take a look, and we'll move it as fast as the chair says we should move it.
Rick Taylor. Sorry, at Seoul, I asked you if I really like the DLEP latency range extension, but I'd really like to see the range extension apply to all the core metrics for DLEP, because it seems strange just to do it for latency.
So would you provide a proposal of what you would like to see in the document on the list?
Sure.
And then we can evaluate it in specific rather than in theory. I think I said maybe the same thing last time, but I didn't go read the minutes. But my feeling is, sure, in theory, let's talk about the specific details, and I think that's reasonable. The one thing that comes into mind, though, is how do we deal with the options of which ones you're going to send and which you're not? So that'll be an interesting thing in your proposal, senior proposal.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm hoping that the mechanism you use to do it, range extension for latency, can be applied to the others, but you're right, there's a negotiation feature there, sort of which ones am I going to talk about. Yeah, and we already have a way of negotiating those parameters, so we could just follow that, and then we could do multiple data items. Okay, I'm happy to discuss it on the list. Or we could do data item containers. Hey. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and in principle, my answer is sure, why not? In practice, I want to see what the specifics. Okay, I'm happy to have that conversation, which is why I'm not sure we're ready for last call yet. It depends on what the working group feels, but I think we can make this a better document by addressing a wider range of things in one doc. Yeah, but what I think would be cool is if someone implemented it and did a pull request to the Lincoln Lab folks, and that's all public, and then go to last call. I'm a firm believer in code along with specs. So that, to me, that would be optimal. I'm not raising my hand to do the code, though, at least not in my spare time. Anything else? Next. Obviously, given the time, I'm not going to rush through these. I'll go through them at sort of at pace. Feel free to interrupt, and we'll talk as much as we can. We should take advantage of the fact that we have both the time and the reasonable number of people that we can have a good discussion. Okay, so the third document, control plane-based pause. This is a simple, I think it's analogous that it's an X on, X off, stop sending, okay to send, stop sending, okay to send. It's pretty simple. There's an open issue on encoding, and this is I think this was the one that Rick first brought up, that maybe brought up his container, what has become his container idea.
And basically, it's a better way of composing lists within a data item, DLEP data item. I also think it's equally applicable for optional information elements. Those are two semantics that are missing from the current data item definition, and I think it's a really great core extension. Whether we use it for any of these documents or not, I still think it's a very worthwhile extension to the base DLEP protocol. So the ultimate question is whether we wait for the proposal on container or we proceed as is. I was actually hoping for one slide that would show what the containers look like, but oh well. Next. So actually, I could probably use this slide to say what a container looks like. So what a container will look like, and please correct me where I'm wrong, I'm presenting Rick's idea, not mine, is that you have the standard data item type and length, and then the V of a normal TLV would just be another data item and length. And you would have a series of these within a series of data items contained within a larger data item, and that way you could convey them as a set. The length of the container, here we go, the length of the container would implicitly tell you how many data items were contained within that single data item. How would it do that? Is the first length would be the total length, and then the second length would be of the next data item. And as you parse, you would just keep iterating and finding more data items until the total length was processed. Did I get it right? Uh-oh, he's going to correct me.
Rick Taylor, no, I'm going to say you're spot on. The advantage of that is if you look at the data item type for the container and say, do you know what, I don't give a damn about this, you can just skip straight over with the length if your parser supports that sort of behavior. So you keep the flexibility of TLVs, but you can also wrap them. It's not big or clever, but it's a pretty good way to go, we think.
It's a good primitive for the protocol.
This is Stan. I just wanted to say, yeah, I fully concur with this kind of a construct. This is, I think, the right way to go.
Great.
And it's Rick again. Lou, I know you wanted me to do a slide on this, but I conversation with the chairs, they thought, I thought maybe you were going to do a slide. It doesn't really matter because this slide covers it. Yeah, we can produce a document on this. The problem is, from my perspective, is the document's going to have to be a best practices style of thing, because we're not actually going to introduce any new data item types, because a draft or a document using this encapsulation will go and reserve its own data item types and say, you know, pause extensions, we use this style. So it's more sort of guidance from the DLEP guys on how we'd like you to do it. And I don't know how that exists as a document.
So that's really interesting. So there's 2 points in what you just said. One is I'll infer, and I know it's true because of previous conversations,
yeah,
which is that any data item contained within a container data item must be specified as being allowed to be within that container.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other one is you and I apparently had a different understanding of what a container is. I thought a container was a new data item type, so this would be of type container.
I believe on our telechat, we went round that idea and backed away from it because there was no way to tell what kind of container it was, and that was to be defined in the document, in any extension document.
That works for me, but I think it highlights that we need a document here.
Okay, so looking at the chairs, what kind of document do you want us to write, given that this isn't a DLEP extension, it's a kind of meta extension?
Not being the chair, but I'll still answer.
No.
Write the document, we'll figure it out.
Well, if I'm understanding you correctly, you could continue with the container idea before the best practices was out and then point to that as an example of how to do it.
I'm happy with that.
It wouldn't stop this from moving on using this idea. you could continue using it as an example of a best practice that then we would point to and illustrate.
I'd like to have that conversation documented that Rick was referring to, where there were two different approaches. One was a generic data container value, and the other is extension-specific container values. And I think it would be a good thing to capture
Yeah,
and get
'cause
some agreement on.
otherwise in 4 weeks' time, we'll have another conversation. We'll both vehemently disagree with each other about the same thing.
Or as soon as we propose doing it, someone's going to say, well, this is a generic mechanism. It shouldn't be in your document. It should be a generic mechanism.
Right, and if we're going to define a generic mechanism, then you would have to wait on this document as opposed to having it just a type that's defining a best practice.
Okay, so I think the best answer going forward is let's get started on a document that defines containers. We'll figure out whether it's informational or best practices or whatever it is. But let's get started with some text. I volunteer to help.
Okay.
Uh,
And can I make a request, rather than trying to take an existing document and sort of mash it, that we just knock up something quick and purposeful just from scratch? Because
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
we all
that's-
know what we have to say. So
I think that's
bang it out.
absolutely the right way to go. Just define what a container item is. This document is, to some extent, a further definition. It's almost an extension, but it's not. It's a further definition introducing this concept of nested data items
Yeah, it's a
and
bit
how they should be
meta.
handled.
Yeah.
And then let's get that documented and discussed. And in the interim, as Justin said, there's nothing that stops this specific work from just going ahead.
I'm happy with that.
It all made sense into the last statement. I think.
Well,
I think we need to wait to see what happens on the container.
It does depend on if container is a new thing or if it's a meta thing that.
It's, in my mind, it's a meta thing. Sorry, it's Rick still. In my mind, it's a meta
And
thing.
I think what you're saying, Lou, is that hasn't been settled yet, and we can't move forward until that conversation has happened and we have a good idea of, is this a new thing that we're trying to define, or is it just a best practices, uses type, define what's inside of it, and we can then proceed.
I think we can take a step on this document of restructuring it to match what a hypothetical DLEP container looks like. I just don't, I think that the document itself, though, will end up being blocked until we resolve what Rick's new document looks like. That's okay. I mean, this is just a -00 document. We'll take the next step of changing it into the DLEP, DLEP container format in the next rev. You will publish yours. We'll synchronize, get them aligned, and try to get them out at the same time.
Rick Taylor again. One last question. It sounds to me that you're happy to not rush this and wait. Because I know sometimes people say, oh, I don't want to wait for another document to be finished. It sounds like you don't mind, you want to get it right rather than get it now. Is that right?
If you ask me, I'm willing to wait to the next IETF. How's that? At the next IETF, I'm going to say, we're done. Let's move on.
And I'll answer to say, if we haven't got it done by the next IETF, we've got it wrong. You know, for containers, it shouldn't be that hard.
And I don't mean last call. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a document that can be adopted. It can be adopted as the working group.
Okay, I'm thumbs up to the chair. I can do this. That's fine. And I will take on board all help. So
All right, now on to the meat of the discussion today. We have the DLEP DiffServ aware credit window extension. This is this adds in the DiffServ awareness from the other credit window extension draft that's existed in the working group for quite a while. And it also does one other thing that's quite different, which is it does flow control in one direction. And we can talk a bit about that. Actually, I'm going to jump ahead. We'll talk about that one. Not quite yet, but I'm going to jump ahead to that one because I interpreted that was closed. I'm going to confirm that's closed. So the big difference between this document and the other credit window document stands that you mentioned is 1, DiffServ, 2, unidirectional. The changes from the last version is we clarified when data cannot be sent. We have these credit windows defined, but we didn't explicitly say if you don't have credit, the router can't send traffic to the modem. And I thought that was a pretty important addition. We thought it was a no-brainer. We added it because the comment I think Stan you made, I think it was you. Since it was a no-brainer, we added it. The other issues were a little more complex. The 5 open issues were a little more complex, and we wanted to talk about them before just making those changes. We also thought it would be good to capture resolved issues. And one of those resolved issues is whether or not we're going to do bidirectional flow control or just unidirectional flow control. I can't remember if when I first did the slides, I had a slide on this, and then I think I took it out. Go to all the way to the end, second to last slide. Nope, go back one. Yeah, so I removed the slide. It's A6, so let's go back to that slide. I'll just use what's there. Yeah, I thought I didn't know how much time I was going to have, and so I ended up, you always try to cut it back.
As much as you need.
Right, but at the time I didn't know, so I had a slide and I removed it and then go back to the old version. Okay, so the one resolved issue is in the document is 8.6, so it's the last one, and that's adding bidirectional flow control to our original idea of just doing unidirectional. So I brought this up on the list based on the last meeting, as well as some input from the chairs. And the thinking here is, in theory, doing bidirectional should be pretty easy because the same mechanisms that you define for one direction should work in the reverse direction. I started making those changes, and then in making that change, I realized that because of the way DLEP messaging happens, it gets a little more complex on the initial startup case. When the windows are running along and you're sending traffic, you just send increments along, and we use a new message for that, and it's fine. Here's an increment, here's an increment, I need an increment. It all chugs along really nicely. But when you're first adding a destination or first bringing up a relationship between the modem and the router, it got a little hairy because of the different types of messages we have, because we have direction-specific messaging in DLEP. So I ended up hitting a lot of special cases. And it got to the point where I was thinking, all right, we're adding this because in theory it's easy, but now in practice it's hard. Is it really worth adding this added complexity now? And more than that, we could still add it for one direction and then do another extension to add for the other direction when we need it. So the fact that it was causing a lot of complexity now, it wasn't clear that anyone really was ever going to use it, and that we could do one now and then come back and do the other later, led me to pick up the conclusion that personally I prefer it, and that's what the question that we discussed in the list. And part of that was asking, DLEP's patterned after some PPP extensions, right? My understanding is that in those PPP implementations that exist, no one ever did credit windowing in the direction of traffic flowing from the modem to the router. Given all that, it seems sort of compelling to reduce complexity, talk about it on the list. 2, 3 people respond on the list saying they don't really care about it. So the question for the chairs, maybe the rooms, is my takeaway as editor of this document a correct reflection of working group consensus?
I'm going to defer to Stan.
Yes.
Okay. And is it okay to proceed this way?
Yes. I mean,
Cool.
it's for me personally, it's qualified in that I still think if we could agree on a proper abstraction, a proper set of abstract names for the different roles, the two different roles, then I actually think it'd be pretty easy to document. And I think that the sticking point is more semantical than.
So I think it's okay to put in the abstract names. My problem wasn't in the naming, it was in the messaging. So if it would be helpful, we can sort of think about, or I can take a look at changing some of the terminology to use a little bit more of that abstraction now. And then when we think we've resolved all the other open issues, we can take a look at the document and say, maybe we should revisit this. And at that point, we could say, okay, it's not that hard. Let's do it.
That's absolutely fair, and that's probably a good way to proceed. My intent was to try to get another rev of the initial credit document with some of these abstractions involved or in play to see if we could better come to a,
Merge them together.
better come to that merge. I just didn't get the time.
That's fair. That's fair. So we'll take a pass at this document using more generic terminology. I'll go look at what you have in yours, and maybe we'll just use those, some variant of that.
Yeah, I mean,
but not change the messaging at this point.
I think yes, I think that's absolutely the right way to go.
Okay, works for me.
As chair, the only thing that worries me is that we go back and forth for too long on this. Because you said you thought there was consensus at from the last meeting in the interim, and now it's going on one more. So
what I'm
I'm
suggesting is a sanity check at the end.
Yeah.
To say, should
and
we go
I think
by-
that's
by-
reasonable, but and I think we should proceed as you're doing and what you guys just talked about, unless there's objections from the working group and here on list. But I would like to see progress by the next IETF meeting.
Fair enough. So now we're going to go on to the 5 open issues. If I remember correctly, this is the worst one. No, this is just a reminder of what our mechanisms are. So what's currently in the extension? One is we have one extension type. It's called DiffServ aware credit windowing. We have 2 new messages. It's actually one to support one transaction. Credit window control is the message type, and it has a credit window response. From the modem to the router, we carry credit increments. From the router to the modem, we give status and also credit requests. The status is just saying, here's what my window looks like. That's really important to support resynchronization and allow the modem to detect when the router, its view of the credit windows are really out of sync with the modems. 4 new data items. We have the queue parameters, which is structured the same as pause with the same issues that we talked about for the containers. It has the DA credit grant. This has different meaning based on what message it's contained. In the destination update, announce, and announce response messages, it is a set of the credit window. So it's an absolute. Basically, it says, you got a new destination, here's how many bytes you can send to it. That has since they come along together, it has the nice property that it allows the credit window to be easily synchronized between the router and the modem. Because at the time the update happens, the up happens, before the up, the router shouldn't be sending to that MAC destination. As soon as it receives the up, it can start sending. Since it's a set, the receiver, the modem knows that the credit window is full. And then when the router starts sending, it's sending from that same full value. So it has a nice way of ensuring that the credit windows are fully synchronized. The same data item is also used to provide increments. We also have the credit window status. We talked about how status was reported. And we also have the credit request. That's just, I'm running low. Give me some credits. Next. Now we're on to the first issue. This is not the big one. So there's been discussion about merging this document with the existing credit window document. We think that's a fine thing. We have no problem with that. As the authors and as the working group, we discussed that last time and assume that that's going to happen. The question is when. We started on the path of merging and then realized we're actually not doing an editorial merge, but trying to resolve some open issues and different ways of doing things and talking about that in the base documents there's open issues. And we realized from our standpoint, we thought it would be much better to resolve all the open issues and then figure out how to do the merge rather than the other way around, because it got a little complex. Is that the only way to do it? No, absolutely not. Is this a preference thing? Yes. But so we, the authors, propose to reach closure on these issues that we've identified and then do the merge. And in conversation with Stan, the author, not Stan the chair, but Stan the author, I think we're working well together and working towards this goal. I'll ask Stan the chair and the author if he agrees.
Stan the author agrees with you completely. Stan the chair just encourages all of us to do it faster.
Yeah, it's nice when we have a group that wants to get things done and collaborate in a collaborative form. So, comments? Next. Wow, I got through a slide without Rick.
Mark this day on your calendar.
So in the current draft, we have the notion of multiple credit windows, although they're called queues, being associated with specific DSCPs. And those also being, and then those queues more specifically associated with a specific destination. So I can have a set of DSCPs that map to a set of queues that all go to one place. What happens when those queues are not specific to one destination? Let's say they're shared across all destinations. Or let's say I have two groups of queues. One group goes to the left side of the room and the others go to the right side of the room. How do I deal with that? Well, it turns out we missed that. And Stan picked up on the fact that we missed it, and I think it was Stan.
It doesn't matter.
Well, see, this is part of the good review that happens when you work together, is you find out problems. So it's all goodness. And yeah, it's clearly missing. So we have a proposal on how to solve that. Next slide. By the way, we were hoping to have this fully documented for the meeting so you could look at a draft of it, and that's my apologies for not getting that written. So first of all, the first part of our proposal is that we get rid of the queue window, sorry, the queue definition, and replace it with something we call the credit window data item. Furthermore, this credit window item identifies one credit window. It's unlike the previous one, which had a list of these queues or a list of credit windows. We've gotten rid of that. It has a single one. The credit window is identified, what we call credit window identifier. That's arbitrarily, what's that, 2 bytes. We figured that was enough. If for some reason that's not enough, we actually can we can give more bits if we need, but it seems like 2 to the 16 queues on an interface should be plenty. Even the most complex system that I've ever seen, a packet system, the maximum queues was actually 2 to the 16 for an interface, that is. So we have the queue identifier, or sorry, the credit window identifier, called CID for shorthand. Furthermore, credit credit windows, as indicated by CIDs, can be either per destination or shared across destinations. The CID does identify a list of DSCPs that will be used with that particular credit window. The reason we include DSCPs here is that's actually used in traffic classification. So we identify a credit window. Where do I have that? I don't know where I said it, but there's an initial credit window that can be included. So this says when I use this credit window, the first time I use it, it's going to have, this is the number of bytes available. You don't have to do that. Our thought is you can put zeros in here if you don't want to provide an initial credit grant.
Rick Taylor, quick question. First off, I really like the way you're going with this. This
Okay,
seems
great.
to make so much more logical sense to me, because always in my mind, a credit window was a construct in its own right, and the fact that it was paired to a destination or whatever, I like that separation of responsibility. Along that same train of thought, don't you have a data item which already deals with credits associated with a CID, which you tie up?
No, we associate, it was basically, it just gave you an increment of, here's some bits. It didn't tell us what DSCPs are used on it.
No, I know
Or-
about that. My question wasn't about the DSCPs. It was about the initial credit grant. Let me start again. I like this data item mostly, but it seems to do creation and initialization simultaneously. I'm wondering
I
whether-
thought about that. I thought specifically about that case of whether we just use the data item that we already have. We can. The only thing in it is the CID and this. So it seems sort of, I don't know, it seemed like extra processing to put it in two elements, and I don't feel strongly about it. If the feeling of the working group is we should just use the two data items together. I started thinking about there's what happens if you put it in out of order in the DLEP message, so that the grant came before the definition.
Data item processing is not order sensitive.
Right. So what if you processed it? Since it's not order sensitive, you could process it in the wrong order, and so it would be an error. I don't have the CID, so that means you would have to scan the whole thing, the whole list of data items.
I
Make sure that you process the credit windows first, and then process the grants.
Okay, perhaps I'm asking this question based on an out-of-band conversation I had with Stan, possibly with you. I can't remember if it's the same conversation, where we're talking about the difference between setting up your credit windows, which might happen at session initialization, you might happen at destination up. And so that says, yeah, I got a destination and it's doing credit windowing and its CID is X. Don't send me any traffic because I haven't told you you can yet. And then at some time later, you get a message to say, I've built my queues, here's your grant, go.
Right, and that's actually what this supports. So this isn't, this data item just says what the identifier is.
Yep.
It defines the credit window. It says what the queues you use. It's an optional credit window, but it doesn't tell you where you're allowed to use it. It doesn't tell you what MAC addresses you can use it. So when you receive this, you can't use it yet.
Okay.
Because the last element you need is what MAC addresses are associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a pre-setup. So in the shared case, and in typical usage, you would provide them in a session message. So on the sort of peer-to-peer level.
Yeah, session in it, yeah.
So that in a destination specific way, destination general agnostic way.
Agnostic.
Thank you. This should be coffee instead of water, I think. So you can provide it in a destination agnostic way. And by itself, you couldn't actually use this yet. It's just setting things up.
And that was my question. Sorry, it's still Rick. That was my question of why the initial credit's even in there, because you haven't. You say, oh, initial credit's 1 million, and I go, great, I've got 1 million credits. Let's go. But what you're saying is 1 million credits, but you can't use them yet.
I can't. But if I'm, let's say, I know I'm always in the shared, I'm only doing the shared case.
Yeah.
The fact that I set it up beforehand means when I associate it, I'm ready to go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm probably splitting hairs, so I'm
Well, and we can keep an eye on this as we move forward and decide whether or not it's the right thing to do.
okay.
But I was
Could
a
I
little
ask
bit
you to
worried.
keep an eye on it?
What's
please?
that?
Can I ask you to keep an eye on it then? And
Yes.
then I'm happy.
I was just a little bit worried about the whole processing thing and the ordering thing. And maybe that's being overly sensitive. I didn't want to be the first to define a data item that says you must process this other data item first. And I just didn't want to be that document.
Just a quick, Justin Dean acting as a member. Quick question. If you have a conflict and a packet comes in and it matches a DSCP, but its destination is to a different queue, do you handle that conflict?
So let me walk through this and then come back to that.
Sure.
Because there's actually a couple of different ways you can interpret that, and there are a few different conflicts. And I think on the next slide, I talk about some errors that we haven't resolved yet, error cases. So the first thing you do is you pass one of these, set up the shared credit window IDs. Actually, it's setting up credit window IDs. When they come in, you don't really know whether it's shared or not. In the per MAC case, what we expect to be typical is you'll provide the definition on the destination up, and it's there where we think initial credits is really important. Why do I have an asterisk here that says typical? It's because in fact, even in the per MAC case, you could provide, if you know all your credit windows at the start of time, because you have a limited set, you could actually provide them all at the start of time when the session comes up. And then when the MAC comes up, only do the association. And that's really where I'm getting to, is the key thing of when you can start using these is when the MAC comes up, when you get the destination up, you get a list of CIDs which are allowed to be used, to be allowed with that, that can be used with that MAC destination. So you get an up, you get a list, the credit window list data item. Do I have that on the, show me the next slide? No, I didn't include it, that one. So you get it in the credit window list, and you are allowed that, the router is allowed to send to that MAC address with any of the DSCPs that are identified, and it knows based on the combination of MAC plus DSCP that it gets from the credit window, which credit window to deduct. On the flip side, when the radio sees a MAC address and then the DSCP, it knows what credit window to map it into. I can interpret the question that you talked about in a couple of ways. One error case that exists is if the modem, when it gives the destination up, gives me two credit windows that happen to have the same DSCP in it. So if I have two credit windows, 1 and 2, and they both have a specific DSCP value, which credit window do I use? I don't know, it's an error. So one of the questions is, that error can be detected by the router at when the destination comes up. It can see that it has an overlapping credit window. What should it do? Can you flip to the next slide for me? No, this is a different error case. Okay, back one. So what's the right answer? What's the best way to deal with an error in an up message? I don't think we've ever had an error in an up message. So one of the questions I actually had for the working group is how do we want to deal with those errors? And that's, by the way, the next slide. And I didn't call out this case, but it's certainly
This is Stan. I think we did code there's there is the ability in the base spec for you to deal with errors on up. I mean, it's either the error you're generating is either a terminate, which means it's the error is so fundamentally wrong you can't deal with the destination, or it's a continue, in which case it's, you know, that's an error. I can't deal with that functionality. But yeah, this is exactly the kind of questions that were going through my mind as I was looking at this slide. Is if I have these overlays, especially if one of them is defined as a shared window spanning multiple Macs. For instance, I set it up in the session initialization with an AF, and then I set up on destination up, I give you another credit window with an AF DSCP code setting, and now I've got traffic to send out. Which does it go against, the shared or the?
Well, and that's the collision.
Yeah.
That's a specific collision case. Another case is I get traffic and I don't have a matching DSCP. Well, either it uses the default and there's a way to specify a default, or it's dropped on the floor, because like if it doesn't have a matching DSCP, it's dropped. I think that was the other way to interpret your question, Justin. I'm not sure which of those two you were asking.
I was more referring to the one where you have multiple queues and you don't know which one to send it to because it matches on multiple.
And right. So the terminate, my memory of the terminate on destination up is that it's actually a session terminate.
Yeah.
So you actually do a whole session reset if one destination is wrong. And to me, I took
That's too big a hammer.
it's too big a hammer, because what it means is I may have 10 destinations out there, and the 11th comes up and there's something wrong in the 11th. That means I take down good traffic to those other 10.
No, I
So
agree.
to me, I translated that into we don't have a way to handle it.
I'll agree with that.
interrupt?
That's like killing a moth with a sledgehammer. It's a bit much.
Rick Taylor again, just to clarify the error status codes and the mechanism. So if you receive a destination up and you're the router and you want to tell the modem there's a problem with that, then destination up response has a status code. And in core DLEP, we classify status codes into two types, which is terminate and continue. And that's about the session. So if you send me something that's absolute garbage, and I do not believe that your implementation's gone wildly wrong, you send an error code with whatever's relevant, which is out of the terminate range, to say, I'm hanging up on you, you've gone wrong. I think for the examples where you've sent me a combination of information that doesn't make sense to me, which one we go for, it doesn't matter. Whether we decide it's too brutal to send a terminate or whether it's a continue code to say, let's keep the session going, but do you know what, let's back off. I would say this document should define a status code of credits have all gone badly wrong, but I'm happy to continue without them. And you document what that behavior is, or a different status codes of credit window's gone wildly wrong. Do not talk about this destination again. I'm never going to use it. And that's something that needs to be defined in the document.
Yeah,
but the terminate continue is about whether I'm about to kill the TCP session.
Yeah, we didn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the wrong answer, but
I think
it has to be defined by the doc.
So I did think about, and I think even in the version that I've written so far, there's a status code that is credit window mismatch or credit window conflict overlap. That was it, credit window overlap.
Okay, and do you define with that what happens?
No, I didn't. I wasn't quite sure what to do.
Right.
And so that's the question. So you've given two alternatives. I like that. One is overlap cease, which is I'm not going to send you anything, because remember the router is the one that's saying it. So I'm going to ignore this MAC. The other one is could be credit window ignored. I don't know, where you're not sure what the accounting is going to happen. What's going to happen there?
Unfortunately, we didn't allow you to parameterize status codes, because otherwise it would be
I
lovely
think
to have a
status codes. It's two different status codes.
It'd be nice to have a status code of, I've picked one of the two options you just gave me. I'm using CID 3 because I became confused.
Oh, yeah.
But luckily we didn't go down that rabbit hole. So
yeah, that's a level of negotiation. The other thing I thought about is could you use a destination? What's the one that you query for a destination? That's announce.
Yeah.
Could you do an announce and do something interesting there? I don't know.
Well, like, the conversation I was having with Stan about how you make credits flow the other
That
way
is-
hangs off an ounce. So
You could, when this is Stan, when you detect that, you could theoretically query with an announce. The other thing is from the router's perspective, as opposed to using a terminate, the router could respond with desk down, which is kind of like kill it. You know, you brought it up, but no, I don't want to talk to it. There's also an ignore status code for destination response.
we kind of dropped the down going back the other way with a shut up about that. I don't want to know. Status code is how we resolved it.
So I think there's some interesting options, and do you want support for both, or do you want to say, do you want to pick? Do you want to say, keep going and ignore, or put it to a down so that it forces it to sort of try to resynchronize? But then you're going to you might get into conflict where it's, the router, the modem sends to the router, Rick's the router, sends to Rick, bad credit window next. He sends back, I guess, down. Okay, you send back a down.
I send back a response with the status code of, I don't want to hear about that anymore. I can't remember what the exact status code is, but it's...
And then I say, okay, well, here, let me try again. Then you come back and do it again. Do we go back and forth?
no, because, sorry, Rick, the rules of general DLEP are, if I send you a destination up response with not interested, I've remembered now what it's called, I am not interested in that destination.
That's
You
true.
are
You-
not allowed to talk about it again until I tell you I am interested once more. If you then tell me about that destination again, I'm going to say, you've gone wrong, terminate, and we'll restart the session because you've misbehaved at that point.
I think we're going to have a bunch of text we're going to write here.
Yeah.
We may have it wrong. And
I was going to say, I think in the long term, yeah, we need to get all this resolved, but we're probably going to have to take this to the list.
sure.
This looks like a take to the
I just want to
list.
take advantage of
It's only, yeah, it's only because, there is some thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
This is what some of this winds up being.
Can I suggest you
Um,
put some comments in the document as you uprev it, and then once you
Sure.
merge it, this is continued with
One-
one less discussion at the same time to give us all a chance to cogitate a bit
Yep.
about this.
One other recommendation I would make while we're in this general areas with these overlapping windows is that we could at least consider, if you define via destination up credit windows, then on those destinations, by definition, I will not use the shared window.
It can happen within that single destination app because it will contain multiple, it'll have multiple data items
Mhm.
representing multiple credit windows. And if you get it wrong, you still have overlap. So it doesn't need to be between shared and per destination. It can be between shared and shared, or between per destination.
Rick again, Stan makes a very good point that in general for things like metrics in DLEP, stuff you announce at session up is overridden by more specific, stuff you talk about at session init is overridden in general by stuff you talk about at destination. So some of this problem disappears
I
by
don't think
following
so.
that rule, but only half of the problem.
The self-consistency problem still exists because it can
Agreed.
happen within, and if you're solving it there, it's the same solution. But then you need to actually, you could solve it by giving your parameters of which CIDs are broken. That'd be nice. So cease this CID. How's that?
A request with -1 for credits.
Say again?
Send back a CID with with an associated request for a negative number of credits. I never want to use that. Go rethink.
We
But
could-
I'm thinking on the
We can
cuff
figure
now.
out
So
a way to encode cease this CID if that's really, really want to do. Next. So there are a whole bunch of error cases actually possible in the previous slide. I actually decided that rather than go into all of them, I thought I had more limited time, that I would talk about this specific case, and that would help decide and guide the solutions for the other. Another issue brought up by Stan is that a router can have limits on the number of credit windows it supports, or the way it uses those credit windows. And that we probably want to provide that information or deal with that case when we have if it ever happens, a modem that's more capable than the router. So if we hit that case, then we need a way of telling the modem that the router has fewer credit windows, total windows, than the modem. That's one of them. Go ahead.
Rob Hamilton. I think the way that you tell the modem that you don't have enough credit windows is simply not to write to them, simply not to give any data on those, right? I mean, if your router only has this many things it can do, I mean, the modem is just going to have to wait until one of those is available, yes?
Well, we could go that way, but maybe the modem can be smarter about how it uses the credit windows.
Smart modem, so am I. Sorry. go ahead.
so that we don't stop sending traffic. I always feel that when doing work on the control plane, sort of one of the worst sins is to have a control plane limitation translate to a data plane loss. Now, in this case, maybe it's a control plane limitation, but maybe it's hardware. You know, maybe the router has fewer queues.
Sure.
So I don't know which it is, but I want to try to get to the case where get the control plane out of the way and hit the limits of the hardware. So we may end up in the case that you're saying, but we may not. So we want to have, the objective is to have the communication, the control signaling necessary to use your hardware limits to the maximum ability.
So we're talking probably about a lot more signaling between a modem and a router than we originally said.
I wasn't here, so I have no idea what was said.
Okay.
So I mean, my background in this is I wrote a similar protocol from routers to optical line transmission systems. We had a lot of bandwidth there, so you know, the thinking may be a little different than what's applicable here. And if what I'm suggesting doesn't make sense in this environment, well, let's figure out something that does.
Rick Taylor, just jumping in on that last comment about having the control plane starting to flood out the data plane. The general assumption, and yeah, it's an assumption, and it's in the assumption section of DLEP, is that the local link between your router and your modem is going to be far faster than your over-the-air link beyond the modem. So concern about control plane traffic was not considered. And that's when we moved away from worrying about individual bits on the wire for the control plane protocol. So it's a valid point, but I think we're kind of ignoring it on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the strategies you could do as a modem is, if the router doesn't have as many queues as you do, is map more DSCPs into the same credit window, and thereby allow the traffic to flow, but you're not giving the same QoS or class of service that you could potentially give with a more capable device. Another problem is that a router may only have per destination credit windows. Sorry? That's not right. I misread it. It does not support per destination credit windows. All it can do is traffic classification based on DSCPs. It can't do it on the combination of DSCP and destination MAC. How do we handle that case? So those are the limitations. Oh, check that out. I did have it on the slide. Number 3 is the other error case then. Just brought up. Cool. So some thoughts that we had is, for the first two, that the router explicitly provides its capabilities during session establishment. There's already a handshake there. It's really easy to say, hey, here's the total number of credit windows I support, and here's whether I do per destination or not. So now it's just figuring out how to encode it. I think that's a really simple solution.
Rick Taylor again. We kind of designed session init to work for that way. So an extent, the session init is the only place you're allowed to put data items that the other party may not recognize specifically. So you can say, hey, I have this extension, and here's some extension-specific data items. And if the guy on the other end doesn't support the extension, and he finds those data items, he doesn't hang up and say, I don't know what you're talking about. It was built for that sort of negotiation. So I'm in favor of option 1, 2.
Well, That's a specific solution for 1 and 2. Sounds like you endorse it. That's great. The other thing, and I think we've talked about this in the past privately, one of the things I really like about doing things during session establishment rather than when a destination is reachable is the less processing you can do when a destination is reachable, i.e. the more you can shift when the session is being established, is the faster you can send data. So if I can make the destination up processing really small, I can send data really quickly. But if I put a lot of complexity and negotiation during destination up, it means that there's going to be a lot of time or a lot longer before data could be sent to that destination, which to me is, again, the control plane getting in the way of the data plane, which I always think is a bad idea.
Sorry, it's Rick Taylor again. Following on exactly from your statement, I really liked the fact that you've moved to the CID model. You've got the CID data item, which announces, and here are the code points I'm using. But following on from your statement of trying to push as much early processing to the start of the session so that we can get quick startup, and looking at some of the problems with duplicates, can you split your CIDs into the definition of a window, so a window type, and then at destination up say, here's a new CID, here's a new credit window instance, this is instance number 7, and it's of type 3, which I've already discussed with you and you've already validated and you've already pre-allocated your resources to handle.
We do a lot of that. What we don't do is a destination set.
Yeah.
So if we added a set semantic, then you could do the set semantic validation on the session creation. So that's a good idea.
No, it wasn't so much about the destination set, it was kind of getting all the generic.
No, it's a credit window set. It's not a destination set.
Sorry, yeah, it's a credit window set,
So
not a
it's
destination
these
set.
credit windows can be used together.
Yeah.
And by defining that sort of set notation during session establishment, you can do all error processing at that time. So I like that idea. Hopefully there are notes being taken because I'm not going to remember all these ideas. I guess that or I'll be watching myself, which I hate doing.
We have a note taker.
Good.
We just need to check whether our note takers run out of credits or not.
Well, we are being recorded, and we do have video. Even as I said, I hate watching myself. I think have to do that. That or I definitely make sure to buy a drink afterwards to pay the scribe. Thank you. For the third error, I think we probably talked about this quite a bit. Oh, there was one other thought we had, is maybe use the credit control message for some sort of notification and processing. But I like the discussion we've had in this room more than that original idea. So I'd like to withdraw that suggestion and stick with our discussion that we had earlier. I'm in trouble.
Justin Dean, acting as member. One drawback is if you're setting everything up in the beginning in terms of credit window sets, if your modem is doing something fancy where they change because of physical characteristics or something that's happening in the modem, you lose that dynamically being able to shift what credits go where.
Well, so we're not talking about statically pre-provisioning the credit window itself.
No, I understand.
It's the set of queues, and it's really the set of queues that are going to be that can be associated with a destination.
Right.
So if you are looking at these as profiles, it just means you have to pre-establish the profiles. So you can have, I'm reaching destination right using profile 5. Something happens in the radio, and now I'm using 4. Does that work for you?
I think the physical characteristics could change what the queues look like, or what the modem is going to assign the queue when it says, hey, this destination is up, and I have a queue that's this size because it's a really crappy link right now. But later in the day, because of characteristics that are physical, it's a great link, and the queue gets much bigger, and I can send a whole bunch more data.
So that's sizing of queues. What about sets of queues? The number of queues
No.
that you'd be using to reach a destination. Would
Yeah,
you start out?
this is Stan. I just want to interject. What I'm hearing is you have a queue that's defined to be five code points. Are you envisioning that because of some characteristic change in the modem, the queue will change to be 7 code points or only 2. That's a bigger change than, you know, it's a megabyte, now all of a sudden it's 3 megabytes. That's just a credit increment.
Yeah, I'm not a modem designer, so this is just something I'm thinking of as a drawback, playing devil's advocate here. I could see some really fancy modems swapping stuff around to get the queues to maximize the throughput, going out multiple different directions or frequencies or whatever.
Yeah, maybe like I'll make something up here. This is a really fast connection. This is really fast. I don't really need any fancy queuing. I know I'm never going to drop, so I'm just going to use a single queue and everything's going to map against it. But now I'm operating on a really constrained link to that destination, and I really want to do a lot of work on queuing. So I'm going to give that destination 16 queues with, 16 different DSCPs. So each one is really finely controlled. Are you talking about that type of thing?
Yes.
So I think we can do that with sets. What we won't be able to do is if that combination of queuing to a destination is a large number, it would be crazy to try to do a large number of set definitions. So it goes to a question of scaling there. I guess.
Sorry, can I chip in here? It's Rick Taylor again. My suggestion was to splitting the queue, having a credit window instance separate from the credit window set. This is the set of DSCP code points, which makes this profile was the word I liked. So you've got profile 1, 2, and 3 put up at the beginning. And what you're suggesting, and what I think is perfectly valid, is there's nothing to stop, in my mind, the modem at a later date going, do you know what, there's a profile 4 now I need you to consider, because I'm swapping this destination across to using this new profile 4 because something clever's happened inside me. It's just a data item. It'd be great if the profile data items went all the way up front to get the processing right, but I don't see any reason why they couldn't be introduced later.
Can we flip back one slide? One of the things that would be fairly straightforward to do, but it's heavier processing on destination up, that would resolve sort of this error, this conflict, is that if we still allowed the credit window identifier and initial credit information to be set on session, but then on up, you give a list of DSCPs, and each one of those DSCPs map to a specific credit window. And in that case, you could never have one DSCP mapped more than one credit window. The question is how many DSCPs do you think you're going to be handling? Now, you could certainly have one that says this value, we already have this there, this value is 0. If it's 0, that maps to everything else. Or this is the default one, and then here are the additional 5 DSCPs that we care about. Or even 10 isn't too bad. But if you're talking about, how many bits? 2 to the 5th, 4th, something like that. Actually, that's not too that bad. But I don't remember what's the total number of bits that are actually usable. It's actually 8. Just because our normal DSCP uses smaller than 8 bits, we crafted this carefully that we actually don't care about the semantics of that 8-bit field in case someone wants to do something crazy. And that's actually by design.
Rick Taylor again. I wasn't thinking of that. I was looking exactly at that figure you've got there. I was thinking of splitting it into 2 data items. So the bottom 2 lines of your ASCII art become the credit window type, or the data, the DSCP code point profile. So you, on session initialization, you get some of those from the modem. So here are the profiles I use, and they've got profile IDs of 1 to 20.
So sort of like a template?
Kind of like a template. Yeah, so here are some DSCP sets. It is a profile, a template, a meta type. It's not a meta type, it's a type. And then whenever you need to actually hand out some credit, so on a destination up or on a session up, if it's using Stan's single session case, you say, here's a new credit window with a new CID, and in the reserved field on the top half of that diagram, you say, this is the profile number it's using. And there's nothing to stop you putting the credit window profile data item into some other, as you said, control message, credit control message to say, oh, by the way, I'm introducing a new profile, and I might then send you a destination update to say this destination's now using this new profile, restart your credits with this new value.
So I think based on this discussion, I have enough to think about and to propose a specific solution. Right now, I'm actually leaning away from what you've just said. But I'd like to ask, how about if I write it down? And I often find in writing it down that in documenting the full implications of a direction, that I change directions. So I'll start with the direction I'm thinking of, which you've already heard. And if it fails, I'll come back to you.
Okay,
This is Stan. I just want to jump in real quick. I think that's a great idea because I think all of us are going to need a little bit of time to think about this.
Okay, I'll shut up and sit down.
I've already talked way longer than I expected. But, in fact, how long does the session go?
That's how much time you've got.
I'm sorry?
However much time we've got in the session is how much time you have.
I'm chairing the next session, so we can't run over. Next, please. Next. One more. This one is definitely Stan's. We have in the document, we have a way to resynchronize if the modem believes that the router is getting too far out of sync. That could be based on credit window statuses, and even though it doesn't need to be signaled, it also could be the number of times it keeps getting credit requests. So, and it does that by doing a credit window set. Stan, in one of our conversations, said, hey, why don't we think about just always doing sets? My feeling is that will lead to us getting more likely to be out of sync, but I have no data to back that up. And maybe this notion of always using sets will result in a much simpler and cleaner credit window synchronization process. And I think it's a great area to do some experimentation and simulation. And the question is, does anyone think that this is worth it? And are they willing to step up and spend some time on it?
Yeah, this is Stan. I've actually thought around and around about this, and to some extent, I've actually gone to the exact opposite, which is always use increments and never use absolutes sets. But I was just a little concerned, and I don't have any data to back it up either, that, you know, sometimes it's absolute and sometimes it's an increment. And, you know, it's just a little more confusing.
Well, we can call it an increment. And an increment, the first time you get an update, first time you learn about a destination, what are you incrementing it from?
Well, that's true.
You're incrementing it from 0.
That's true.
And but the only thing that eliminates is the possibility of doing a reset. So what do you do if we do always do the increment, how do we say, I want to reset the window? And how do I reduce the window? Because we also use the sets in the case where, for instance, we have a high-speed link that now we get a lot of noise and have to reduce the rate of it. We also use it for that. Reduce the window.
Yeah. How do you currently envision reducing the window?
You send a set.
Okay. Fair point.
I don't want to interrupt them.
It happens so seldom.
That's exactly. Rob Hamilton again. Is it possible that you might want to say sometimes we're in a condition where we have absolute sets and sometimes we have windows?
We always have windows. It's whether we are giving an increment to the window or setting the window. So your window size, whatever you got, you're adding 10 to that bucket, or dump what you got in your bucket and now it's set to 10. That's the difference. That's what we mean by set versus increment.
And who's in control of that? Is the router or the guy that's always in control of that?
No, it's the radio, because he's the one who's transmitting on the link. Sorry, the modem, because he's the one who's always translating on the link. Whoops.
Yeah, the generalized theory here is that the router is going to be capable of overrunning the modem. So you want the modem to be able to control what it receives from the router. So it's always,
Sonics off comes in.
yeah, this is always, so this would be the modem either saying, as Lou said, I either want your window set to an absolute value, so dump what you've got and set it to this, or add X to whatever the current value is.
The router's the guy that I'm thinking would have, and maybe I have the wrong definition of router here. He's the guy with the resource that we're trying to share.
So the router, what we're trying to do is have the router throttle what it sends to the modem, so it doesn't overrun the modem's queues.
Right.
So the scarce resources on the modem, but we're trying to affect the control on the router because we think the router is going to be more sophisticated. And yeah, I did talk about a boundary case with the modem is more sophisticated. We don't really think that's the likely case, but we got to deal with our error
I agree
cases.
with that. It's just, okay. I'll wait.
All right, so if you're interested in having more discussions about this, certainly feel free to do it on the list. I sort of feel like this is an opportunity for a good research paper, if anyone's a researcher. And if you're interested in experimenting, love to hear the results. Next. Actually, I know this gentleman here does IEEE stuff. Maybe you guys have some better ideas. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, if I would expect the IEEE folks to have some really good insight in this area, and I'd love to hear from them. But that's okay, not to put them on the spot. All right, we've already talked about data item containers sufficiently, so we don't have to talk about this anymore. Next. So what do we do? We want to move forward as discussed on the first couple of documents. That doesn't mean last call right now, but you know, wouldn't mind getting there not too long. And I seem to remember, and I'll have to go to the minutes, there was one comment on the multi-hop document, but I don't remember what the comment is. We'll get it from the notes. And then we plan to update as discussed here. So on the pause extension, it's to anticipate what the data item container document is going to say. It'll be set up for either version of that, and we'll go from there and look to resolve that before the next meeting. And credit, we got a lot of changes.
Rick Taylor again. Quick question to the chairs. Have we got time for me just to ask a little general purpose question about the containers thing?
Yeah, we got, what, 40 minutes?
Okay, I'll try and be short.
Do you need me to be standing up here?
Yeah, because it's kind of asking you, and it's also an open question to those who are playing with DLEP. It's
It's going to be, it's relative to the pause.
no, yeah. Go to the pause
back to
slide
the
because
format.
it's containers. As I was looking at the follow-up, the credit windowing extension, you had an interesting example of a container there. So we've actually seen two examples of containers. The first one's here on the right-hand side. The pause restart is an obvious example of a container where you have a data item that is effectively a set of things. So the container data item really just is a pair of brackets around this set of things. Now, in the credit windowing, the DiffServ aware credit windowing draft, your container at that point kind of has some header information. So your initial credit data item says, I've got this common stuff here, and here is a set of DSCP code points.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing as what's
Right.
here.
Why isn't that a bracketing of DSCP code points?
But one has some data associated with the set as a whole.
One's a list
do you
of
want to
elements,
encapsulate-
and the other is a list of data structures. One's a list of single elements. This one has a length, and then a list of one single element of type.
I haven't expressed myself clearly.
Oh,
Okay, both of them are lists of things,
yes.
but one of them is a list of things plus a common bit at the beginning.
Yes.
So there's information about the container and then the things in it.
Yes.
And the other one, this one here, is just a list of things that are wrapped up in under a type. Do people want the container extension or the container, whatever it is, document to say, oh, if you have common header information you want to include, so this is container X and here is some information about the container and here are its contents. Do you want that header payload thing? Because I know I did a very rough cut draft ages ago. We then had a conference and we hated that. But then I've just kind of seen you draw it in ASCII art on one of these slides. So I'm wondering whether I didn't express myself clearly that time either.
So I expect that with the container-based solution, we'll have one that says in this container. So by the way, what container gives us is to some degree ordering.
Yeah.
It also enables us to know the processing scope of a set of information elements. And I would expect if I'm encoding queue parameters using containers,
Yeah.
the first thing I'm going to do is there's going to be a data item that gives me.
No, it doesn't fit in that one.
Yeah, it doesn't work in this one.
But it's the one in credit windowing. Can we skip forward to
that one I would never put in data items.
because
No,
I
I
think
can
that
do-
goes straight into, you could do that whole credit window data item as a container
Sure, I could do it as a container,
with
and then I have
the first 4 lines of your ASCII art become the header.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether
Maybe.
it's a good idea, which is why I was asking.
I think from a generic processing sense, the notion that you have that the container it bounds an information set, and that information set can be made up of single items plus a list of items
Mhm.
makes sense.
Okay.
So independent of our specific examples, just from an information modeling perspective, I think it makes sense.
This is Stan. I mean, if you wanted to use a more generic container type, in this case, for instance, the first run I would make at it is that I'd create a data item that's called credit window identifier.
Yeah.
And it would have just the SID in it. And then I would have another data item that says, here's the initial credit grant. So everything inside the container data item is there's no header, in other words. You data itemize all of the headers, if you see what I mean.
And you put them in as single entries followed by a bunch of duplicates.
So it is
Okay.
truly, the container is just a wrapper over a series of,
It's just parentheses.
I'm sorry, they're TLVs.
Yeah. I know, but we decided to call them data items. TLV is just a format. This is we won't go over that again. Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I just wanted to
in
get
other working groups, we call them TLVs, or actually there's objects and sub-objects. And it gets really fun.
yeah.
Just data item is fine.
Sub-PLVs. We have sub-PLVs in the working group as well.
At least we haven't introduced relative OIDs, because in the last session, they were talking about roids. And I don't want to.
So, I have certainly exhausted the topics that I came prepared to talk about, and done so in about twice the amount of time I hoped. But that's good. We've got some good feedback, enough so that I don't remember all the items, and I'll be consulting the minutes and trying to get these out and the updates out well before the next meeting. I don't want to say in a week or two, but maybe it'll be 4 to 6 weeks.
As time permits, yeah.
Thank you.
So since we finished early, it's open mic, so if anyone wants to comment on anything in Manet at all, now would be a good time.
No. Yeah, there is one comment I wanted to make, and that's based on some discussions I've had with Justin. We have an open charter item on multicast fibs and multicast forwardings in Manets. There is, from what I hear, some level of work going on that's not in the IETF, which is great, but we need to bring some priority to that work inside the IETF because it is a chartered item for us. So I would urge the working group to, let's start to get some energy behind that if we can, and let's start talking about that if we can, because I think it's a really interesting topic and it's something that where we could really do a lot of good work.
Justin, Dean, regarding that, I talked this week with Sue Harris, co-chair of what is it, I2RS, and they have 2 drafts regarding FIB documents, RIB, they call them RIB, like FI RIBs, and they're Yang based, but they're routing configuration for routing, and they do some of what we need a FIB to do in Manet for multicast, but they're missing a few key features. One being they don't do duplicate packet detection because you don't get duplicates in wired networks, so they're not thinking about that. And I'm not sure that shoehorning in something in their solution is the right approach, but maybe we can take what they have, or maybe we can take some of the ideas they have. But we should be looking at those documents as well, because they are doing good work there, and it has a lot of the Yang stuff already built in, which is a big plus. So anybody looking to help with FIB stuff, which is a charter item for us, I think that's a good spot to start looking, and I'm going to do it myself as well.
Rick Taylor, one last open question. I was in the routing area open meeting earlier, and one of the working group chairs of Roll said that they'd had AODV presented in Roll, and that it was going to be passed back to Manet to have a look at and help them with. I thought it was still on the Manet. I thought it was still a Manet document, or it's all been pulled out?
No, it's been declared from right now. The actual AODV document was declared dead. I think I do believe there's an individual submission for AODV that's floating around out there. And let me just say this about that. Roll is chartered to do routing protocols. And they have selected, apparently for some uses that they have selected AODV. So my take on it, and I haven't had a chance to speak with Justin, but I'd be looking for his concurrence or his dissent. If we're asked to review, great. Any review comments that in any way, shape, or form reference the emotional, disastrous debacle that we had with AODV, I'm not interested in entertaining them. I'm not interested in seeing them on the mailing list. The question is, does this document address technical issues that are in Roll? And they're doing it, they're asking for our review as a courtesy, and we should review and respond with the appropriate technical issues if and when we see them.
Thank you. That seems a very sensible answer.
I would ask, do you concur?
I do.
Okay, having said that, if there's not anything else, then I think we're done early. So
One last thing, Roll is in the next session, yes? Or was
Roll is the next session.
So I'll see you all there, I'm sure, or most of you.
All right, we're done. Thank you, everybody.
If you haven't signed the blue sheets, please do so. I was talking to myself.
I'm going to make you take that in.
That's fine.